Okay. So I'd like to look at chapter 21, verse 17 today. Parshat Bamidbar, Parshat Chukas, Sefer Bamidbar, Parshat Chukas. Chapter 21, verse 17. It's in the Chumash on page 661. Numbers 21:17. Yeah. It's a fascinating little poem. Az Yashir Yisrael, Asashira Zosali Be'er Anula. Then Israel sang the following song regarding the well. I guess in a responsive way. Here's the song they sang, or the poem. Be'er chafaruha sarim, karuha nidivei ha'am, bimchokek b'mishanosam, umi midbar matana, umi matana nachliel, umi nachliel bamot, umi bamos hagai asher b'shtei Moav, rosh hapiska, v'nishkafa al pnei ha'yishimon. That's the poem. Spring up, O well, sing ye unto it, the well which princes digged, which the nobles of the people delved, with the scepter and with their staves. And from the wilderness to Matana, and from Matana to Nachliel, and from Nachliel to Bamot. Actually, I suppose the Omi Midbar Matana is after the poem, even though it's part of the same verse.
I mean,
so
the typing
yeah,
in English indicates what
yeah,
the translator thought the poem was, since it didn't.
Right. If you look at the greater context,
poem, yeah.
Look at the greater context, starting from, let's say, verse 10, 11 here, right? Verse 10 on page 660. So it said, and the children of Israel journeyed and pitched from Ovot, and then they journeyed from Ovot and pitched at Iyar Avarim, and then from thence they journeyed and pitched in the valley of Zered, and from thence they journeyed and pitched on the other side of Arnon, for Arnon, and then it goes on to Moab, and then it goes off on a brief tangent to talk about Moab, giving some geographical context to Arnon, where they pitched on the other side of the Arnon, right? So then Arnon is back to back with Moab, and Moab, between the Moab and the Amorites. And now let's talk a little bit about the valleys of Arnon. That's this well-known poem. And then from thence, verse 16, and from thence to Be'er. And now, it's called Be'er. That's where the Lord said to Moses, gather the people together and I'll give them water. Then Israel sang this song. And then from the wilderness to Matana, and from Matana to Nachliel, those are other stops, right? So that's why the poem ends there. But it's interesting that it's the poem is still in the middle of a pasuk, still in the middle of a verse. So the poem is Be'er chafaruha sarim, karuha nedivei ha'am, bimchokek v'mishanosam. So what stands out about this poem? What are they remarking on when they sing about this well?
When they talk about the princes
Mm-hmm.
who dug it and the people who delved, are they talking about they come upon this well, or the well appears miraculously?
Well, what do they say here? They say that the well is dug, right?
Yeah, it seems to be, but by not by them have they come upon it?
They were dug. It was dug by princes. Oh, I see what you're saying. They've come upon a well that was dug by princes.
Princes of of the Amorites, or of the people who owned that land before they came upon it. I don't know.
Hmm.
So they sang out of, I guess, joy because their thirst was quenched.
Mm-hmm. So they're remarking here that the well is dug by princes
Mm-hmm.
and the nobles, and it was dug using their scepter, their staffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about usually who digs a well,
The laborers, not
right?
the
Usually
princes.
laborers dig the well, right? Ordinary people dig the well and the princes drink. Here, the princes are the one who are digging the well. And what are they using? They're using their staffs. They're using the very symbol of their princehood.
Mm-hmm.
In ancient times, primitive, not even goes back to ancient times, but it still has its manifestations today, where the head of the tribe had a staff, and it was a symbol of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And still today, a scepter is a symbol of royalty. And so they use the very symbol of their princehood rather, to dig this well.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the symbol of a well? What is the symbolism of a well? When you think about it, the symbolism of a well is it's water that comes up from the earth, from under the earth. The water that comes up from under the earth, where does that come from? Well, naturally. Where does it come from? Where does it naturally come from? It comes from the rain, right? It comes from the rain, and then the water seeps into the earth, collects under the earth, and then ultimately springs up in the well. You're very thoughtful.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Maybe there's water under the ground.
There is. That's where the well comes from.
Right, but I mean, there's a cycle that happens. It's hard to say what comes from what. It's like chicken and the egg. Water collects, and then the water evaporates and turns into clouds, and then the clouds come down and fill up the streams and stuff like that.
Yes.
So there's a cycle that occurs. So it's hard to say.
Well, I agree with you. There's definitely a larger cycle, but when you look at the well itself, what you're seeing is water that came up from under the earth. And if you just ask yourself, where did that water come from? It will have come before having come under the. Where did the water get under the earth from? Well, it came from above the earth.
There may be some underground streams.
Aquifers. Right. Yeah. Aquifers. It's the water that's under the ground. There's like an underground ocean. Aquifer. Aquifer is a body of permeable rock which can contain or transmit groundwater. So here's a
Fur. Oh, fur. Is that a stem that means rock in ferrous?
it is spelled F-E-R, yeah. Aquifer. A-Q-U-I-F-E-R. So aquifer, the water that's under the ground that comes in the well, actually infiltrates from above. The groundwater above ground seeps in to the ground, ultimately collects under the ground, and then is brought up through the well. Okay? So this is a deep mystical symbolism of that which is below but came from above. Now, the symbol of the well or the spring is, so if we look back to the beginning of the Torah, we have a reference to the well or the spring watering the garden. The water of the spring, right? The river. Not necessarily that we're not talking about necessarily mountain stream which collects from rain that comes just, but the spring that comes from under the ground and then creates a river or a stream that irrigates the garden, right? That is the garden being watered by the water which originally was up there, went below the earth, and now springs up to water the garden. This is the story of the Garden of Eden. If you look back to the beginning of Genesis, the Garden of Eden is the garden of delight. So the well being a symbol of the Garden of Eden, the well being a symbol of the actual, that which waters, that which gives life to the Garden of Eden is the well. And the well is the water that comes from under the ground that used to be above the ground. Okay? So it might be said that this is the symbol of the divine consciousness of every individual, where our spirit was part of the great divine heavenly consciousness. And then it's put into the body. And then it needs to be dug out. So it was in the heaven, it was above, it goes below, and then it's kind of trapped there and needs to spring out. And so we then are the composite of the earth and the spring. Because we have within us a divine consciousness that's buried within us. And it needs only to be revealed. Who reveals it? It's revealed by the princes. the princes will uncover the well. So who are the princes in our symbolism? Princes are our ancestors. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And actually, it's interesting to note that Avraham and Yitzchak particularly were involved in the digging of wells. When we go back to the stories in Genesis, that was a big part of their occupation. And then Mechokek, the scepter and the staff, is Mechokek. Actually, the word Mechokek has at its root the word chok, which means law. Interesting that the word law, the word law has a relation to, so there's three words here that are related in the same word. One is scepter, the other is law, and the other is engraved. The reason why the law is called chok is because the law is set in stone. It's engraved. It's established as law by being engraved into the stone. You see the word, verse 18, which the nobles of the people delved with their scepter and with their staves. So the law engraved with the scepter is all indicated in the word mechokek. That is, the law engraved by the scepter is indicative of the teachings that we have from our leaders, that we are committed to, or that engrave, that carve out from within us our well. And so what might be said here is that the secret to the secret to revealing our own inner well, our own divine consciousness, is the mechokek, is the scepter that carves out the law, that engraves the law and carves out carves away, digs away the earth that covers up our own inner well. You're very thoughtful today.
I'm just wondering. Spring up. That water is irrelevant little side issue. That wells or springs. Spring is called a spring.
Yeah.
And the image of springing is like the jump up.
Right.
That the water comes out of certain places in the earth.
Naturally.
Shoots out,
yeah.
Shoots up.
Right. So the well, so that you're absolutely right. The difference between the well and the spring is the well is dug and the spring is sprung up naturally.
And maybe the spring then later turns into a well. I don't know.
Possibly. I mean, here you identify a place where, I mean, essentially, let's say, knowing that there's water under the ground, you dig, and then the water springs up. Right? You don't pull the water out; it springs up. I mean, theoretically, you could have the pump.
Get rid of the obstruction.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the idea of the obstruction. So that's I like how you put that. The obstruction, getting rid of the obstruction, is key to identifying our own inner godly consciousness, which is to say, we have within us this godly heaven consciousness. We have it in us. And you can't force it. It's already there. All we need to do is remove the things that are in the way of it being there. And what's in the way is our own selves, is the earth consciousness that we also have. The remarkable thing, though, and I also like that you pointed out that the water springs up, and there's something very beautiful about the water kind of gushing out, bursting forth from the earth. It has a very ecstatic quality to it, and this
force you to sing a song.
Yeah. But recognize that ecstatic quality is as a result of, was only possible because the divine consciousness was buried under the ground. Right? When you see the a stream, naturally it's just a stream. You don't necessarily have that same ecstasy, that same excitement as you do when it bursts out of the ground. And so that experience of the release of the water is as a result of it having been buried. And so there's and that's why the river, the spring, is that which waters the garden, not the rain necessarily, but the spring waters the Garden of Eden. Because the Garden of Delight feeds particularly off this dynamic of the concealment and the revealing of that concealment, or the removing of that obstruction. The thing, though, is, and again, going back to what is the Machokek? The Machokek refers to the law, refers to the Torah. That is our inheritance from our ancestors, from the princes. And so what we need to do then is to give up a little bit. And sometimes our earth is so tightly packed, and we need to let go a little bit, and give up to the Torah. And when we so let's say in our own experience, the divine consciousness, what conceals the divine consciousness is our own sense of self, right? The ego. And the ego doesn't necessarily have to be haughtiness or arrogance. The ego is simply the being absorbed with self. Just the fact that my primary thoughts are of myself. In a way, by the way, worry, anxiety is just as much egotistical as arrogance and haughtiness, because it's being focused on myself. It's the obsession with me, and what's going to be with me, and how is going to be with me, and what's going to happen if, and all of this. It's all thinking about me, in the same way that an arrogant person is just thinking about me. So there's an aggressive thought about me, there's an anxious thought about me, right? But ultimately the common theme is that they're all obsessive thoughts about me. Whereas the mechokek, the law, means I'm not thinking about me, I'm thinking about the team that I belong to. So there we have the threefold meaning of the word mechokek, which implies leadership, it implies engraved in stone, and it implies specific rules that I have to follow. So the leader means that I'm following a team. I belong to a team. The purpose of the leader is only to gather the team, to gather the tribe. And so it's about the community that I belong to, the project that I am associated with. Then there is the fact that the law is engraved in stone, which is the idea that this is a firm commitment. And of course, what that firm commitment is, right? It's not it is then the actual law, but there's a quality to the law which transcends the substance of the law itself, which is simply that the law must be followed. Right? What is a law? Let's say, for example, right? In Judaism, there is a law that it's forbidden to worship idols. Right? What is the law? The law is that it must be followed. Before we get to the substance of what it means not to worship idols, a law is that it must be followed, and that's the quality of the law being engraved in stone. And then comes the actual substance of the law: don't worship idols. Okay? And so the same is true for our life. We have these three qualities to what it means to leave the obsession with self, and thus to allow the divine transcendent consciousness that's within us to be released, which is that I think about what is the greater project that I am committed to, and what specifically that calls me to do. So I know that I am a member of the Jewish people, and I have a firm commitment to that, and I take the specific actions indicated by that commitment, all indicated in the Mechokek. And that carves away the dirt, and then allows the real me to come out. And that is a great source of joy and a great source of delight. So much so that it's even a great source of joy and a great source of delight that it waters the Garden of Eden. It waters the heavenly garden as well. In Jewish folklore, there's a great there's this theme of people who had a yearning to have Gilui Eliyahu, to see Elijah the prophet. Have you heard of this before? In Jewish folklore, it's all out there. People who wanted to see Elijah the prophet is supposedly, he never died, and he comes back in human form from time to time, and so there were many people who wanted to know the secrets of the universe, and so they wanted to meet Elijah the prophet and ask him their questions, or they just wanted to experience the sublime holiness of his presence, the presence of Elijah the prophet. And there's stories of people who fasted for many days and prayed and meditated in order to achieve this pinnacle moment. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah says something that blew my mind. He says there's something far greater than Gili Eliyahu, than having the prophet Elijah reveal himself to you, and that is if you could reveal the transcendence of your own soul and see that which is in you. How? Meaning, we have within us in our soul, right? We have our self, our sense of self, right? We have also our spiritual aspirations, right? But our spiritual aspirations are only the tip of the iceberg of what's really going on. And the truth is that spiritual aspiration that we have is the peeking through of that we are actually connected to the divine consciousness, to the water that's above the ground. And actually, what you talked before about the greater cycle, right? That this water that's under the ground is really only part of a cosmic cycle of water. That's really all the water in the world is connected in some way, right? And in a sense, the truth is that within us we have the same divine and holy and godly consciousness that's part of God Himself. So if we would have revealed to us the truth of who we are, that's greater than seeing Elijah the prophet. And this again is the ecstatic experience of the digging of the well, of not the digging of the well, of the water bursting through after the obstructions have been dug away. And there's also, I think, a very real and human symbolism in the digging of the well, which is that it's tedious work, and it's painful, and it's laborious, but ultimately it's the work of princes. And so when we engage in the nullification of ourself, which ultimately involves pulling away rocks, it allows our true selves to spring forth. And then, Az Yashir Yisrael Es Hashir Hazos Ali Be'er Anula, then Israel sings this song regarding the well. Sing along. Be'er Chafaru Hasarim, Karuha Nedivei Ha'am, Bimchokek B'mishanosam, Omimid Bar Matana. And it's a gift from the desert.
Yeah, Matana, is that the name of a place and also the word for gift?
Yes. And once the well was gifted to them,